I have a friend who used to work for NBC, and my friend's job was actually audience analysis. And part of what he had to do was decide the right lineup of shows during primetime television. And he was telling me about a time when they were considering moving the crime drama segment to a different hour of the day. But when their survey information came back, they realized that people actually liked having that 1 hour story right before they would go to sleep every night. And as it turns out, there's actually psychological data that shows when a person sees a conflict arise and resolve all in the same sitting, they experience a great amount of relief. So it makes sense that people would want to know the bad guy is in jail and everything is right with the world right before they'd go to bed, right? So these crime dramas have actually become known as bedtime stories to those in the industry. Now, I'll admit, I really like a crime drama. I do. But I don't know that I like it just for the resolution it brings to me personally. I like to see justice served for the benefit of all people. I'm kind of a justice junkie, I think. I mean, seriously, when I hear the dun-dun in every episode of Law & Order, it just gets my blood pumping. I love it. Now, I don't know where you stand on all of that, but I would bet that you like to see justice served as well. So you're going to love our study in the book of Esther today. Go ahead and open up your Bibles to Esther chapter 5, and let's dive in because we've got a lot of ground to cover. All right, so last time we were together, we saw the reaction of Mordecai and the Jews upon hearing the news of Haman's edict, and it wasn't great. There was mourning, fasting, weeping, and wailing. And Mordecai called upon Esther to use her royal position to go to the king and beg for the lives of their people to be spared. Well, after 3 days of fasting and praying, Esther does go to the king. So let's start in chapter 5, verse 3 to see the king's response to seeing Esther standing in his inner court. Here's what he said to her. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." And she answers, "If it pleases the king, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet that I've prepared for him." Now, some have asked the question, why a banquet? Why not just tell him right there in the courtroom what's going on? But let's remember, these two haven't actually seen each other in a month. Esther's not only beautiful, she's savvy. She knows that she needs to serve the king. She needs to make the king laugh. She needs to remind the king of all the reasons why he chose her as queen so that he won't dispose of her like he did with Vashti. Okay, but why invite Haman, right? He's a scumbag. He doesn't deserve to be doted on by the queen. Well, perhaps she was hoping to shock him into repentance. That if he found out that she was a Jewess, he would change his mind. Some commentators think maybe Esther was trying to make the king jealous, so then he would actually be more inclined to hear her request. We don't know the reason why the banquet. We can only speculate. The important thing here is that the king and Haman both excitedly accept her invitation. So later, at the banquet, King Xerxes asked Esther the same question. "Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Clearly, he loves her. He is offering her half of his wealth and assets to be her very own. Now is the time for her to lay it out there. Now is the time to tell him that her death certificate has all but been signed. But no, she waits, and she asks the king and Haman to come to a second banquet the next day. And she says, "Then I will answer the king's question." Well, I imagine that Esther leaves this banquet hopeful. Xerxes probably leaves this banquet intrigued, but we can see in the text that Haman leaves this banquet on cloud 9. He goes home and he gathers his friends and his wife Zeresh, and he goes on and on and on about how amazing his life is. He's got all the riches and all the sons and all the honor, and he's the only one besides the king that the queen even thought to invite to her private banquet. Everything's great, right? But then Haman's mood swings. And in chapter 5, verse 13, he says, "But all this gives me no satisfaction, as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." Remember Mordecai, he's the only officer of the court that refuses to bow down to Haman. And this is the main reason Haman wanted to annihilate the Jews. So Haman's wife Zeresh, she pipes up and she encourages him, saying, well, you know what? You have all the power. You've got the king's signet ring. Why don't you just do something? So she suggests erecting a pole 50 cubits high on which to impale Mordecai. Yikes. Well, naturally, Haman approves of Zeresh's plan. They're a real match made in heaven or elsewhere. And the pole goes up. Meanwhile, back in the palace, the king is having trouble sleeping. He's tossing, he's turning, and he finally calls and asks that the annals of the king or the journals of the king be brought in and read to him. Hopefully he'll fall asleep because, what's better than a bedtime story about yourself? Well, lo and behold, the account that is chosen to be read is that of when Mordecai exposed the plot that the officers had to assassinate the king. And so Xerxes asks his officials in chapter 6, verse 3, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? And the officials have to answer, well, nothing. About this time, the sun is starting to dawn. And Haman, so excited about his plan to assassinate Mordecai, cannot wait. So he's milling around outside the king's chambers. And so King Xerxes calls him in. And he asks Haman, in his professional opinion, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And I love this part. Verse 6, Haman thought to himself, well, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? And so he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Oh boy, this is just too good. My love for this list is twofold. One, I know what's about to happen. But two, look at the detail here. Haman has clearly thought about this a time or two. He has played this scene out in his mind so many times. And the fact that he uses the words king and royal 7 times in this little paragraph, that just goes to show you how big he wants this moment to be. But in all of his dreaming and scheming, there is no way he ever anticipated what comes next. King Xerxes thought Haman's plan was splendid. And he commanded Haman to go at once and do exactly as he had said for the Jew, Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Well, Haman, I'm sure seething with anger and utterly humiliated, followed the king's order because what else could he do? But I can't help but wonder, what did these two men say to each other as they went on their parade around town? Chances are Haman probably didn't say much more than what he had to. And seeing that Mordecai is a pretty humble guy, maybe he didn't either. But I like to imagine that maybe at the end of it all, Mordecai jumped down off the horse, gave Haman a little pat, and said, thanks for the ride. I don't know, but I do know this had to be an awkward situation. Oh, but friends, believe it or not, it's about to get even better. So Haman then goes, and he attends the second banquet with Queen Esther and King Xerxes. Xerxes asks Esther again to name her request, and this time, she does. Look at chapter 7, verse 3. She says, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. That is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Picture this, people. Esther, eyes sincere, voice steady, poised, and confident. Xerxes, leaning in, brows furrowed, confused, angry. And Haman, choking on his wine, eyes wide as saucers. What is happening? So the king leans in and he asks Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. And Esther replies, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Man, I don't know about you, but I cannot read this story without sound effects. So let's do that again. This vile Haman. Dun, dun, dun. Xerxes gets up in a rage and storms out to the garden, and Haman, realizing that his life is in jeopardy, throws himself down on the queen's couch to beg for her mercy. Of course, it's at this very moment that Xerxes comes back in from the garden, sees Haman in a pretty questionable position, and loses his ever-loving mind. He has Haman hauled away, and in a moment of trying to figure out what in the world he's going to do with this traitor, one of his respected eunuchs pipes up and says, essentially, Haman just erected a giant pole out there. I think he was going to impale Mordecai on it. You know, the guy who saved your life. But I don't know. I'm seeing a turn of events here. And Xerxes responds, impale him on it. Now. And justice is served. Except for the fact that the Jews are still scheduled to die. But we'll get to that next time. So what do we learn about God's justice in Esther chapters 5 through 7? A whole lot, actually. But let's just narrow it down to 2 truths for now. Here's the first one. If you crave the demise of another, you can expect to see your own. In John chapter 10, Jesus is reminding his disciples that he is their shepherd. And he says to them, I have come so that you might have life and have it to the full. Now, you've likely heard this quoted a time or two, but did you know that this is not just an isolated statement? Now, Jesus says this in response to Satan's lies. The whole verse says this, the enemy has come to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full. And we know who won that battle. But those words, steal, kill, and destroy, do they sound familiar? They should. Destroy, kill, and annihilate. These are the words that the evil Haman used in Esther chapter 3 and in Esther chapter 7 when he was talking about what he wanted done to the people of God. But these were just whispers. These were just threats. These were false words of fear because the thing of it was, God was always in control of this story. And when Haman chose to position himself against the people of God, he chose to become the enemy of God. Proverbs 26:27 reminds us, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. And if someone rolls a stone, it will roll right back on them. So when someone's wickedness is about to put you over the edge, I suggest you just align yourself with truth and then wait for the victory to be revealed. Which brings us to our second truth about God's justice, which is this. When you wait on the Lord, you will be blessed beyond request. And Queen Esther didn't exactly jump in with both feet here, did she? She didn't just jump in and fulfill her faithful destiny in one fell swoop. No, King Xerxes asked her to name her request when she first came into his chambers, but she waited, and she invited him to a banquet. There he asked her again, name it, whatever you want, but instead, she invited him to another. And some have asked the question, was she chickening out? I don't think so. I think at this point, she could have asked for Haman's head on a platter, and the king would have acquiesced. But Esther wasn't there to settle a grudge. She was there for deliverance. Esther wasn't in this for herself. She was in this for the people of God. And Isaiah 30:18 tells us, yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up and show you compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him. Now, I've mentioned a few times in our study the beautiful work that our author does with contrast in this narrative. But I think my favorite moment of contrast comes right here in the justice of God. Because when this edict first went out, calling for the annihilation of the Jews, Esther was frozen in fear. And we see the response of the Jews in chapter 4, verse 3. It said there was mourning, fasting, weeping, and wailing. But here's the fun part. The next time we're together, we're going to dig into this new edict that's released in chapter 8. It instructs the Jews to unite and to defend themselves. And in verse 16, it's going to tell us that now, for the Jews, it was a time of happiness. It was a time of joy. It was a time of gladness and a time of honor. Mourning, fasting, weeping, wailing. Happiness, joy, gladness, honor. This contrast is no coincidence. Our God is in the business of turning all darkness into light. He is just. And that is the good news of our great God. So go and rest in that truth, and I'll see you next time.